Okay, guys, we're going to shoot through medical, legal, and ethical issues. All right, applies fundamental knowledge for the EMS system, safety work building advanced AEMT, medical, legal, and ethical issues to the provision of emergency care. These are national EMS competencies that we'll be going over also. Okay. All right. Our first thing is I always say do no harm. A basic principle of EMS care is to do no harm. Litigation involvement in EMS systems will no doubt increase due to increasing availability and complexity of emergency medical care as a whole. So you'll be governed by a set of laws affecting how you treat patients and then providing competent emergency medical care that conforms with the standards of care. Taught to you will help you to avoid civil and criminal actions. Also, consider your ethical issues. Even when emergency medical care is properly rendered, you may be sued. Okay, one of the major differences between laws and ethics is that laws have sanctions for violations, and that they are enforceable. So, laws define the obligations and protect your rights and the rights of others. And failure to perform your job within the law can result in civil and criminal liability or a regulatory action. So even when you properly render emergency medical care, at times you may be sued by a patient who seeks to obtain relief, often in the form of monetary award for loss of income or pain and suffering. So there may be some administrative action when this occurs. It may be brought to you against you for failure to abide by the regulations of your state EMS agency or even your local protocols. So your scope of practice outlines the boundaries for you for the emergency care that you can provide permitted by your local system. So it's usually defined by state law and based on generally accepted standards, further defined by medical director who develops the protocols and the standard orders. So the medical director authorizes care via telephone and radio, and then you have standard orders and protocols, which are offline medical care, which are those that you can do without having to contact anyone. Okay. So carrying out procedures for which AEMT is not authorized is practicing out of the scope of practice, which may be considered negligence or a criminal offense in some states. So you and other EMS providers have a legal responsibility to provide proper consistent patient care, and report to your medical director immediately if there is a problem. All right, the law requires you to act or behave toward each other in a certain definable way, regardless of the activity involved. It's usually under given circumstances you have a legal duty to act or not. So generally, you must be concerned about the safety and welfare of others when your behavior or activities have the potential for causing harm to others. So the manner in which you are required to act is called the standard of care. So standard of care is established in many ways on published medical literature and then local customs. How a responsibly prudent person with similar training and experience would act under similar conditions. So it's often based on locally accepted protocols and the prevailing customs of the community, such as determining which EMS helicopters are used and how hospital destinations are selected, are important elements in determining the standard of emergency. So you will not be held to the same standard of care as physicians or other highly trained professionals, and you must conduct yourself judged in context of the given emergency situation. So if you have any kind of issues for the safety of the patient, rescuers, general confusion at the scene of emergency, and the needs of other patients, the type of equipment available, an emergency is a serious injury or illness that arises suddenly, threatens the life or the welfare of a person or group of people, and requires immediate interventions. So a lot of your hospitals are designated to the EMTALA Act. We don't really follow up under that. So you have to be conscious of that at just when you arrive at the hospital, or if you are based out of a hospital-based service. Okay. EMTALI is regulated by Medicare, Medicaid services, and can carry severe monetary penalties up to and including loss of Medicare funding for the hospitals that fail to comply. So EMTALI guarantees medical screening, exam, and treatment to stabilize any emergency medical conditions found to any patient that present to a hospital that has an ED. So it also regulates patient transfers, applies to both sending and receiving facilities. So never transfer a patient who needs emergency medical care that falls outside of your scope of practice. And make sure that you've received all appropriate paperwork for leaving on a patient transfer, including the pertinent medical records, laboratory results, radiographs, and other documents. All right. Professional institutional standards include recommendations published by organizations and societies that are involved in emergency medical care. Okay, so American Heart Association in the past has had an international liaison committee on resuscitative, came together to revise guidelines for CPR. Okay, and they do that every 5 years. Your state EMS system may have specific rules and procedures for each system and service. So be familiar with your standard of care for your organization, and all these standards should be realistic and reasonable. All right, if you act reasonably according to the standard practices you have been trained to use, then you can likely avoid liability. So, textbooks have standards. They're all established by NHTSA. Then most states now have what is called EMS enabling legislation, which defines how EMS is structured and designates responsibility to government agencies. So ours falls up under the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and we are branch out below them. We have certifications. We don't have licensures yet. So please be familiar how to recertify yourself so that you don't ever become lapsed in that aspect. All right, negligence is failure to provide the same care that a person with similar training would provide. Gross negligence conducts that constitute a willful and reckless disregard for a duty. Okay, so you may have malfeasance, which occurs when you perform an act that you are not authorized to do. Misfeasance occurs if you perform an act that you're legally permitted to do, but you do so in an improper manner. Nonfeasance occurs if you fail to perform an act that you're required to perform. All right. Okay. So you gotta have all four of these elements must be present for negligence to arise. So you have to have a duty to act. You then have to have a breach of the duty. This is when a person accused of negligence fails to act, as another person with similar training would, and then you actually have to call damages. Okay, a lot of times this ends up in a civil lawsuit. This is why you hardly ever hear somebody with negligence. And the proximate cause is the sense of medical malpractice, essentially considers whether the alleged harm to the patient would have occurred but for the negligent act. All right, abandonment is termination of the care by EMT without the patient's consent. So after care is started, you have assumed a duty that must not stop until an equally competent person with equal or higher training assumes responsibility. Okay, so be very familiar with this. You basically have to turn your patient over to another advanced EMT, okay, not an EMT, not a medical responder, or a paramedic nurse physician, okay? All right, legally and ethically serious matter exposes the patient to harm and can result in civil action against you. All right. Now, leaving the patient you have assumed care of at the site of a single car crashed, care for people injured at another site where two cars have crashed. And these are where abandonment may have taken place. If you're in the ED and you drop that patient off, but you do not get the proper signatures or from the proper level of care, you could be considered charged with abandonment. So, assault was threatening or causing a person fear of immediate bodily harm without consent, and battery is actually touching that person. So, these can be civil or criminal in nature. Kidnapping is seizing, confining, abducting, or carried away by force, not common in EMS, but false imprisonment is more likely. So we have to be very careful when we possibly transport a patients that are consular oriented times three, and they do and are willingly refusing to go to the hospital by transport by EMS. All right. We run into this situation with a lot with caregivers of all kinds of array of people, and they don't understand that we can be charged with false imprisonment. So, all right, defamation is intentionally looking for false statements through written or verbal communication that injures a person's good name or reputation. Libel is making a false statement in written form, and this slander is making a false statement, a verbal false statement. All right, Good Samaritan laws. If you reasonably help another person, you will not be held liable for errors or omissions made in giving good faith of emergency care. So, but this does not protect you from a lawsuit, and it could vary from state to state. In the United States, sovereign immunity is taking the form of legislation that identifies only limited types of lawsuits that can be filed against government agencies. EMS personnel working for government agencies such as fire departments have some governmental immunity for their actions. Governmental immunity generally applies only to EMS systems that are operated by municipalities and other government entities. So if you are part of a governmental immunity, then it may mean that you cannot be sued at all, or it may limit the amount of monetary judgment that the plaintiff may recover. Okay. If you ever have any kind of confusion with this, always contact medical control. That way they can help you, kind of trumble through this. All right. Consent is permission to treatment required from every response a mentally competent adult before care can be started. All right. If the patient is alert, rational, and capable of making informed decisions, he or she has the legal right to refuse care. All right. So we have to be careful with this also. It can be either expressed or implied. You know, if a patient refuses emergency medical care, then you may not care for the patient. So doing so may be grounds for criminal and civil action. So the ability for the patient to understand the information you're providing, coupled with their ability to process the information and make an informed choice regarding medical care, is appropriate for them. So, some tools you may want to use, you need to be able to talk to the patient and make sure that they understand what is happening. If pulse ox or blood sugar ranges are out of normal range, then these readings can provide measurement of information regarding your patient's ability to understand and communicate. Um, all right. Express consent is the patient's acknowledgement that they want you to provide care and transport. It could be verbal or nonverbal, but the patient must also provide informed consent. Express must be of a legal age, able to make a rational decision, and must agree to certain emergency care, but not other care. So patients can um, make decisions on what kind of care you provide to them. Some patients will go with you, don't want IV access. Okay, so that's their right. But you need to make sure that you get a refusal on that and make sure that the patient understands their agreements to not receiving that care and why it may be detrimental to them. All right, implied consent is when a patient's unresponsive, delusional, exhibiting auto mental status, or otherwise incapable of making an informed decision. So it's usually limited to true emergency situations. So document all your actions thoroughly as to why this patient gave you implied consent, and you may have to try to get consent from a spouse or relative. All right, minors and a parent or legal guardian can give you consent to transport a minor. So in some states, a minor can give valid consent to receive emergency care depending on the minor's age and maturity level. An emancipated minor is one who, despite being under the age of 18, can legally treat as an adult based on certain circumstances. So they may be married, members of the armed services, parents, to a child, or living away from and no longer relying on their parents for support. All right. Courts may issue an order declaring a minor to be emancipated, but this is usually uncommon. Okay, so always get consent whenever possible from the parents, especially in non-life-threatening situations. So if it is a true emergency, then no consent is available to treat the patient. The school administrator may be there, any kind of guardian that's there, as long as they're willing to travel with you to the hospital, they can usually give consent. All right, involuntary consent is oxymoron because consent can never be involuntary. People under arrest or in prison do not lose their right to be involved in medical decisions. So be very cautious with that. A lot of times you'll have police officers wanting you to do certain things. However, that person is still in their legal right to refuse care if deemed so. All right, forcible restraints, the act of subduing a patient to prevent harm. It applies to patients who is physically violent, presenting a risk for other and needing treatment. So this is a very rocky road that we will have to travel down. Hopefully you're being trained properly in forcibly restraining a patient. So you do have legal permissibility if you believe that the patient is a threat to yourself or others. But usually you have to consult medical control for authorization to do this. No right to refuse treatments. Patients that are alert and oriented times 3 or 4, whichever way GCS 15, they do have the right to refuse care. But you need to make sure that you are documenting everything that you can about that call and having witnesses, whether it be law enforcement, family members, third party people on the scene. Your partner is usually not the best one to do that, to be a witness, but if it has to, that's okay too. So, but please make sure that you're documenting these correctly, and making sure that you tell that patient, you could possibly die here today if you don't want to go to the hospital with us. But that makes you're able to document that you advise that patient of that. So I always urge them to go to some kind of medical evaluation, even if they'll go POV. I've helped patients into cars before because it's the only way they would go. So state laws generally do not permit a parent or legal guardian to deny treatment for a minor. So consider the emotional impact of the emergency itself. Document all your findings and care. Note how much time you spent attempting to find care. Report and patient signature should be witnessed. Make sure they get a release form and a copy of it, and make sure that you have a copy for your report. All right, advanced directives are one of those things that's still kind of iffy right now. We do not follow those in the state of North Carolina. Some other states may. It's usually called a living will, but it pretty much specifies what a patient wants done. if the time comes within the past. So living wills, DNR, organ donations orders are all examples of advanced directives. So DNRs give you permission not to attempt resuscitation. The bad thing about this is that it could possibly be tore up in front of you. If it is, please make sure you contact medical patrol and get some advice from them if you still have the tore up copy of the DNR. But whenever in doubt, just go ahead and start CPR and chest compressions. Maybe it'll get you out of the house. And you can travel from there. Healthcare proximities needs maybe dual powers of attorney for their healthcare. There is a difference between financial and healthcare on power of attorneys. Please make sure you understand that. So. There's no missing of most forms in here in this chapter. So the most forms will come pretty popular, especially in the state of South Carolina, and it'll become a little bit more popular in North Carolina. So please make sure you understand those and exactly what they will allow you, not allow you to do. It may take you another second or two to kind of read over, but make sure that the DNRs are valid. They used to have a date on them just in case you see an old one. Most new ones do not have a termination date on them now. But all right, ethics is the philosophy of right or wrong, moral duties, and ideal professional behavior. It's related to your action, conduct, motive, character, and responsibility. Morality is the code of conduct that can be defined by society, religion, or a person affecting character, conduct, and conscience. So, applied ethics refers to the manner in which ethical principles are incorporated into professional conduct. You must meet your legal and ethical responsibilities when caring for your patient's physical and emotional needs. So be honest. Don't try to hide anything in your report. Don't try to hide anything from the patient. Make sure your records are accurate. Don't make up stuff as you're going around. And make sure you maintain a mastery of skills. A lot of people now, we don't innovate a whole lot because other people are arriving on scene before us and they may have a blind insertion airway. So we may go into work and have to intubate dummies, X amount of times just to keep up skills. Okay, same thing with IV access. Find you an arm or somebody that will let you stick them just so that you can say that you kept up that skill. All right, please make sure that you keep everything confidential. I always bring up the fact of sitting in restaurants as a group, people eavesdropping on us. Social media has become a big thing. Please be mindful if you're posting stuff on there. You do not want to be posting in the back of the ambulance on social media. That's one thing that you really don't want to go down that road. That's probably going to land you a dismissal from your job. But please remind yourself of HIPAA. Even saying things to your own family members, they'll be asking you all the time, hey, what happened here? Was that really a bad wreck? And things like that. So be mindful of that also. All right, sharing personal opinions via social media is a complex, controversial topic. So, like I said, make sure you understand your local agency's policy and procedure on this. We see a lot of TikToks of people in uniform and they're blurred over their patch. So, all right, an action was not recorded and was not performed. Incomplete or untidy reports are evidence of incomplete or inexpert emergency care. Okay. So the court's possession of records and reports is an action or procedure was not recorded on a written report. It is not performed. And I mean, basically, if you didn't do it, if it's not documented and you send that report on, it's like you didn't do it. So please review your reports. So the National EMS Information System is a tool for EMS professional. Its ability to collect, store, and share, analyze standardized EMS data throughout the whole United States. A lot of your electronic reporting systems are NIMS compliant, so that's why we use those a lot. They keep up with that reporting for us. All right, so mandatory reporting requirements, negligence or abuse of children, older people, domestic violence, injury during the commission of a felony, drug-related injuries, childbirth, rape, animal bites, and certain communicable diseases. So if you are on this scene of a crime, notify the dispatcher immediately. Believe a crime was committed at the scene. Try to provide care, but do not disturb the scene more than necessary. If there's any chance, attempt resuscitation. If it's not, cover the body and prevent further disturbance. So basically, if you're on the scene of a crime, you get there first. You are pretty much in charge of that scene until law enforcement gets there, or somebody with a little bit higher ranking training gets there with you. Most of the states, AEMTs cannot pronounce a patient at scene here unless it is a injury incompatible with life. So be mindful of that. And you're probably more likely going to have to explain why you're not doing anything. So make sure that you have a way to discuss with people on the scene or caregivers why you're unable to do anything at this time. All right. Physical signs of death, determination of the cause of death is the medical responsibility of a physician. So in many states, death is defined as the absence of circulatory and respiratory functions. So if the body's warm and intact, try to initiate emergency medical care. But if there are cases of hypothermia, please make sure that you understand are not dead until they're warm and dead. If you're unsure, unclear, or you're not comfortable with calling on scene, go ahead and start CPR, and then contact medical patrol. So, all right. Pursuit signs of death like cardiac pulse, no eye movement, no blood pressure, cyanosis, lower body temperature. Definitive signs is decapitation, dependent lividity, which is this picture here. And then rigor mortis, which is stiffening of the extremities and of the neck. Okay. Purification is the decomposition of body tissues. So that usually occurs 40 to 96 hours after death. All right, medical examiner's cases of death at the scene, unknown cause of death, suicide, violent death, or death from an accident, poisonings, suspicion of criminal act, and death of a child. All these have to be reported to the coroner or local medical examiner's office. All right. Wish to donate organs is usually voluntary form of evidence by donor card or driver's license. So saving the patient's life may be priority. So make sure you understand your local policies, procedures on this matter too. And then ID places or insignia may have things like a DNA or what they're allergic to. Some medical conditions. So always make sure you check your jewelry that may be on a patient. So